I am now joined by the former UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng. So thank you for your time. And I hope you don't mind me starting like this, but I've noticed that you've done a lot of media interviews recently in the last few weeks. It's been 2 years, almost exactly, since your time as Chancellor of the Exchequer in the short-lived premiership of Liz Truss. Is there a reason that you're kind of doing lots of media now?
Well, I've been around. I've left Parliament. I left Parliament at the general election. And there's plenty going on. And people like yourself want to hear commentary. They want to hear views. And I'm very happy to engage in those conversations. And I think people, when they listen to what I have to want to say, you know, there's an interest in that.
Yeah, there certainly are, and that's why we invited you on to talk to you, because you do have a lot to offer in terms of your vast experience, your economic knowledge, your knowledge of global affairs as well, and we will get on to that. But why it interests me that you're doing so much media now is because, of course, you end up inevitably facing the same questions again and again about your time as Chancellor of the Exchequer. What happened to the economy at the time? Some say it, you know, called it the collapse or the tanking of the economy. Some refer to it as the man who screwed up the British economy. I mean, what's that like, hearing that again and again?
Well, you know, the more I hear it, the less sort of powerful it is, because clearly that was 2 years ago. And I think the Labour Party, our opposition, made a lot of hay with it. But actually, the fundamental problems we were trying to solve are still there. There's still an issue of growth. There's a real concern in the UK that at the next budget there'll be tax increases. The government are heralding that. And of course, we tried to do the opposite. I think it was rushed. Looking back, I think we made mistakes. But the fundamental issues are still there. And I'm very interested in that debate. And as time goes on, I think the issue of growth within the British economy, and not only the British economy, across Europe, will become more pressing and a more fitting subject of debate.
And I find that interesting, because I have heard you defending obviously your strategy, but again saying it was rushed at the time. So if you had a chance at doing it again, would you again go for that sort of drastic action but in a different way? Was it being accompanied with Prime Minister Liz Truss?
I think it was too rushed. I've said this.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think I've said it repeatedly. I think, you know, the ship of state, to use that metaphor, is an oil tanker. It's not a speedboat. You can't move things very, very fast. I think the Prime Minister's view was that we had to seize the day in that expression. But looking back, I think we should have taken a slightly more measured approach. You know, we can debate this endlessly. Hindsight is a beautiful thing, and history is very interesting. But what interests me now more is the future. Is what is the UK going to do in the years ahead? We can talk about the mini-budget, we can talk about the fallout, we can talk about the rising interest rates, we can talk about all of that. That's interesting. But what's more interesting, I think, to your viewers, and certainly to markets, is the future. Will Donald Trump win? What will the nature of the British budget be like? What's going on in France? These are the issues. What's going on in Ukraine and the Middle East? These are the issues that I think people are very focused on, and of course I'd be very happy to talk to you about the mini-budget and what happened 2 years ago. Well, but I think that's of less salience today than some of the other issues.
And I agree with you. I'm very much in mind of looking at the present and the future, what the current government in the UK is doing, how everything else affects that. But that's why I began the conversation in this way, because I'm interested in you putting yourself out there now. Sure. As you say, you've left Parliament, and now you're doing a lot of media interviews, and you're inevitably going to come up against that questioning of what happened 2 years ago. So let's enjoy.
Yeah, and I'm happy to answer it. Happy to answer it, but I'm just saying that, you know, there's that, and also there's the present and the future, and I think people are more interested in the present and the future.
Let's then think about the present and future. Start with the UK, but we will broaden out. But talking about what's happening there, of course, the Labour government that is currently in power, Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, his Chancellor, will say that they inherited a stagnant economy from the Conservatives, and now they're burdened with it, and they won't be able to achieve the growth that they want. Do you buy that as an argument for what they're trying to do?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, I left office in October 2022. Rishi Sunak came in with Jeremy Hunt. They stabilised the markets, and I think they deserve credit for that. And then, of course, this year, we're looking at figures for the UK economy, which are some of the fastest growth rates in the G7. So it's not true to say, as Labour have done, that the economy that they've inherited is a wrecking, a scene of wreckage. I think that's they do that for political purposes, but they also have said that there's a black hole. I think they came in and said there's a 22 billion black hole. But if you have a black hole, you don't then turn round and give the unions a 20% pay rise over 3 years. That seems totally illogical. To say, well, we don't have the money, we've got a deficit to plug, but we're actually going to increase public sector wages far above the rate of inflation. That doesn't make any sense. So clearly, I think they're playing politics. And in order to pay for those wage increases, they've decided to take what's called the winter fuel payment. That's an annual payment of about £300 to every pensioner. And Rachel Reeves, in a bold move, I would suggest, has said she's going to remove that. So these are political decisions. And if you were in the pressure that they say they are, I don't think they would have rushed to do the pay deal that they did.
I mean, they are political decisions, and they are those of the Labour Party, which of course isn't your party, so you're going to naturally probably take an opposite view on them. But in terms of the Conservatives and being the party of the economy, which they have been considered to be for many previous years and previous decades, when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, he was called the tax rise Chancellor because he just kept raising taxes. Now, you had a completely different approach to that. Was the fact that the Conservatives lost the election over the summer because they didn't have a cohesive strategy when it came to economy? It seemed incredibly divided all over the shop.
Look, I think you're right. I think there were lots of reasons. There were lots of reasons that ended Tory rule. We were in power for 14 years. There was a feeling we'd really run out of ideas. We'd had 5 prime ministers, which was an extraordinary number, and we seemed tired and out of breath, as it were. We were people who they felt the people felt they'd had enough of. They were sick of it. I think at the core of this, these difficulties, has been the COVID pandemic, because what happened over COVID was the British government, pumped in hundreds of billions. I'm not talking about tens of billions, hundreds of billions to support the economy. And as a consequence of that expenditure, there were really strong reasons to raise the taxes. And the taxes have kept rising since then. And when the Tories had the leadership contest in 2022, this was at the centre of the contest. Liz Truss said she was going to cut taxes, and Rishi Sunak essentially said he was going to keep raising taxes. Liz Truss won the contest. I was Chancellor, she was the Prime Minister. And then what we tried to do, and this is the relevance of our opening remarks, was that we tried to reduce the tax burden because it's at a 70-year high. Now, looking back, I think we tried to do too much too quickly. And crucially, there were 2 things that we got wrong. One was that we didn't get the OBR to score what we were doing. And secondly, what we should have done is had a very tight spending schedule at the same time as the tax cuts. But we chose not to do that. That was a wrong decision, in my view. And as a consequence of the market disruption, she was removed and Rishi Sunak came in. Now, what Rishi Sunak did was simply continue the path we were on. And Labour essentially are doing the same thing. They're raising taxes because they have to pay for increased public expenditure. And the growth isn't at the level that all of us want to see. And if you get slow growth, and this is the doom loop that Liz Truss described, and Labour have also alluded to this, if you don't get growth, the only way you can pay for rising public expenditure is through borrowing, which is future taxation, really delayed, or through direct taxation. And that's why the UK today is facing increased taxes in the next budget, which I think will take place at the end of October.
Look, let's indeed move on. You mentioned Liz Truss there. I know you've made it very clear in previous interviews in recent weeks, so you're not here to throw her under the bus. I've heard you kind of dance around questions where people are asking you whether you're distancing yourself from her. But I want to ask you this then. She's promoting herself quite heavily in America. We've seen her going stateside, speaking to quite controversial characters, Steve Bannon, etc. Why do you think she's doing that? Do you think that's an interesting move?
Well, look, I think she feels very strongly about the message and the style of government that she wanted to see. I think there are many people in America who are instinctively and temperamentally very aligned with a low tax agenda, which I agree with. It's very ideological. And I think she wants to reach out to find kindred spirits across the Atlantic. And I'm sure there are many people, she has many friends in that country. And that's up to her. I mean, she's left the House of Commons, she lost her seat, and now she's making her own way, figuring out what post-parliamentary life looks like.
Will America pull you in post-parliamentary life?
Well, I've been there a couple of times. It's a nice thing to be out of Parliament, to have the freedom to travel. I'll probably be in the Gulf. I have been to the Gulf a couple of times this year already, and I look forward to travelling there. And of course, for people like yourselves, like your audience, who are interested in global politics, the economy, geopolitics, finance, all those subjects, America is a vitally important country, a great power that has a huge role to play in that world.
What interests me particularly is we're both, you can tell from my accent, we're both Brits. I'm not currently in London, you are. We can see the lovely Tower Bridge behind you there in the studio that you're currently in. But do you think, Mr. Kwarteng, that Britain still has any kind of important standing in the world? Do you think we have a voice? Do you think we have influence?
Yeah, I think we're very good in Britain, probably the best in the world, at doing ourselves down. We're very prone and very quick to criticise what we do in Britain. And it's a part of the British bashfulness, British reserve. We don't really celebrate our achievements in the way that some other countries do. But if you look at Britain today, we're a member of the G7. We're a key player in NATO. We have a seat on the Security Council. We've got the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world. And there are lots of things. We've got the English language. We've got the common law. We've got a great time zone for historic reasons, but it is. So there are lots and lots of things about Britain that are very, very positive. And we're very remiss sometimes as politicians and journalists and commentators. We don't celebrate those things enough. And I'm not at all despondent or concerned about the long-term future of the UK. But I do have issues, as you would expect, with higher tax rates and a less competitive economy in the short term. I am concerned about that.
The reason I ask about Britain's standing in the world is whether or not you think there could be any type of special relationship. Obviously, there has been for years and years, but do you think it will become more special or less special if we say, for example, see Harris in the White House or return of Trump?
I think the British government is committed to working with whoever wins. It was a mistake in 2016. I think the assumption in the government and within the Foreign Office was that Hillary Clinton would win. And I think there was a feeling that somehow we'd overlooked the Republicans in the shape of Donald Trump. I think we've covered that, we've recovered that ground. I think that David Lammy will work with whoever gets into the White House, as will Keir Starmer. And I think it's a positive relationship. You look at NATO, for example. Britain is probably, arguably, the key ally in that organisation of the United States. We've committed to 2% of our GDP to defence. More than that, 2.5%. 2% is the actual NATO number, but a lot of the other partners haven't committed to that. There are whole other areas as well. If you look at what happened in Afghanistan, if you looked at our cooperation across the global politics, the US-UK relationship is very close. And I think that will be maintained whoever wins in November.
And look, you're post-parliamentary now, you said it yourself, so I can hold you to this. Who do you want to win?
I think that it's a very difficult one. I mean, clearly Trump has got a very difficult personality for many people. He's very bombastic, he's outlandish. But I think generally, for me, his economic agenda is more attractive than Kamala Harris, who is essentially, as far as I can make out, although she's keeping very quiet about this, a very strong left-leaning, socialistic, if you like, person whose approach to the economy will reflect that. I think she mentioned price controls in a speech earlier a few days ago. And that sort of language is very scary. We want an open economy. We want competitive markets. We want lower deregulation, and we also want lower taxes. That, over time, will create much more prosperity. I think Trump marginally, well, actually by quite a bit, is more attractive on that.
Just finally, on those points of low regulation, low taxes, is there anywhere internationally that excites you economically when you think about that? We've heard Truss in the past describing wanting to create Singapore upon Thames, London or the UK. Whether or not that's possible, some would disagree. Is there an area in the world that you look at and think that's a vibrant, growing economy you'd like to replicate in the UK?
You look at Singapore. Let me just say this. And we get into trouble for saying Singapore and Thames, because in sections of the British media, they think Singapore is just some giant, industrial dystopia, where there are sweatshops and people being exploited, and it's a terrible place. Quite the contrary. Singapore, in 1965, which is only less than 60 years ago, was essentially a swamp. I mean, there was nothing there. And in 60 years, through visionary leadership, particularly with Lee Kuan Yew at the helm, they've built a country, a civilization that is extraordinary in terms of wealth, in terms of education, in terms of the opportunities that it gives its people. And that was done not by over-regulation or a very, very high tax burden, but by lower deregulation, allowing the market, allowing people's abilities to find expression, and also through very competitive tax rates. So I think Singapore is completely misunderstood in sections of the West. I think it's an incredible human success story. And when we look back at the 20th century, I think Singapore, the story of Singapore, will be one that will fill people with a lot of hope and admiration.
I find it interesting, the Singapore comparison, because I've worked there for 2 years as a news anchor, so I've lived there. I was there through COVID. I've seen it inside out and back to front, and it's not upon me to have an opinion or to cast any opinion on how it's done. But the critics of that argument is that, yes, whilst it's a success story, it is done in a way that is at odds with the British system of sort of free democracy and everything that comes with that.
Yeah.
It required a certain form of hard leadership from the top, and what I'm asking is whether you think that would even be possible to replicate somewhere like the UK.
No, so you're quite right. Look, I wasn't talking about Singapore as a political beacon. I was talking about the economic significance of the country, its performance, and also the fact look at where they started. I mean, they didn't have many resources or much in the way of a kind of natural endowment, if you like, in 1965. The story of that country is pretty remarkable, and I would definitely recommend anyone listening and watching to find out more about it. But you're right, the political environment in the UK is very different. We have a pluralistic democracy that's been entrenched for decades now, if not centuries. And the approach is different. But some of the things that they're doing in Singapore, I think, are impressive and should be emulated. All countries have different circumstances. They've got different histories. They sometimes have different forms of government. But that doesn't mean we can't learn from other countries in this very diverse world that we have.
Certainly, I think it pays to look at other models and other styles of doing. I'm just interested to know about the real life application of it. Look, you did mention the Middle East previously. We have an interest in covering the area, of course, as all news channels do at the moment, because of the situation there, especially in Gaza. How much do you think this is going to impact the outcome of the US general election?
I think it will quite considerably. I mean, it was very notable to me that at the beginning of the year, President Biden and Harris, the administration, had a much more, to my mind, pro-Israeli policy. And you looked at the primaries. I mean, the Democratic primaries weren't competitive. But in Michigan, there was a huge number of people who didn't vote for Biden. And clearly, I think there was a worry that the high Arab American population in Michigan wasn't going to turn out sufficiently for the Democrats to ensure that they win the state in November. And of course, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, these are three key battleground states that represent the Midwest and the old industrial heartland. So there were political reasons for them, I think, to pivot away from a kind of blanket, blank check approach to supporting Israel. And I think they're much more sensitive to the aspirations of people in the Middle East, the Palestinians, and also Muslim voters, particularly in Michigan. And that's a good thing. It's good that people listen to their electorates, they listen to their constituencies, and they're trying to stitch together a winning coalition, and that's perfectly acceptable. Whether they can pull this off is another question. I think it's a very difficult election to call at the moment. It seems very evenly balanced. But I think in that context, yes, I think what's going on in the Middle East can have an influence on the election, given that the election is so finely balanced. It's so evenly placed at the moment.
And I think the balance is the word there, because the issue of what's happening there in Gaza has created an issue, has been a balance that many Western democratic governments who are going through election cycles have had to deal with on that level. And talking of which, back in the UK, Starmer's government have decided to limit arms sales to Israel. Did you see that coming? What do you think of that?
I saw it coming. I think it was, to my mind, quite a gesture, more gesture politics, because I think they're stopping 35 weapons, but that's out of about 350, is my understanding. So I don't think it'll make that much difference on the ground. But it is a gesture, I suppose, in this appalling conflict. And the other thing you've got to remember with Labour is that they lost a handful of seats to a party, to a number of independents who were focusing exclusively on this Gaza issue, and felt that the Labour opposition was not representing the hopes and aspirations of the Palestinian people and the appalling attacks there. And they won seats in Parliament, in the British Parliament, only 2 months ago. My view is that Labour, in order to keep together their coalition, are trying now to appeal to people who are very, very sceptical of Israel's motives and actions in Gaza.
I think it is interesting, going back to that point in the conversation that we had earlier about the UK standing in the world, because it can't be isolated anymore. It can't be, and never has it ever. It's always been a trading hub and an international hub, but increasingly globalised world, increasingly you see these types of conflicts affecting things like elections in the UK and the US, amongst other things. So that's why I'm interested to know, what are you planning to do now, post-parliamentary career? Are you thinking of more international career for yourself?
Well, lots of things. Yeah, lots of things. I mean, I've always had an international interest. When I was in Parliament, I was vice chairman of something called the Conservative Middle East Council as a backbencher. I travelled as a minister to the United States, to the Gulf, a number of other places. My own family background is West African. Those of you who know West Africa will know that Kwasi is a very common name. It doesn't mean born on a Sunday, but it's a name given to males born on a Sunday, that sort of thing. And so my background and my interests, I've written about empire in the past. My interests are very much international focused. Obviously, I'm a great British patriot. I love my country, but I'm also interested in what's going on in the rest of the world. And I suspect going forward, I will be engaged more internationally. Because as an MP, you can't just travel willy-nilly to other parts of the world. You've got to be there you've got to be in Westminster for parliamentary votes. You've obviously got to look after the needs and of your constituents. So you're very much rooted in the UK. I think having left the British Parliament, I think the international dimension becomes more interesting and accessible.
Certainly, you've got the freedom to roam now. Look, Kwasi Kwarteng, former UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.